The Guru Chronicles, The Making of the First American Satguru, by the Swamis of Kauai's Hindu Monastery. Dedication. Hindu history is replete with stories of noble, courageous, high souls who are born to uplift and guide mankind, men and women who come from up down in response to humanity's needs. The more dire the need, the greater the soul sent to meet it. Satguru Shivaya Subramania Swami, affectionately known by his devotees as Guru Deva, was such a soul. He was born in modern times to meet modern challenges, born, he would say, to protect, preserve, and promote the Shaiva Dharma, to bring the knowledge, worship, and realization of God Shiva into the 21st century. How he did that is a story you are about to read. But he would be the first to caution that this is not about him. He was only the latest guru in a lineage that had preserved the knowledge of the self within man since the dawn of history, a lineage that existed before him, thrived during his lifetime, and carries on today. Those close to Guru Deva lived the stories of these pages, saw his communion with the inner worlds, experienced his life of revelation and realization. He looked and acted like Shiva himself, tall, powerful, compassionate, urgent. He did things people don't do, created a new language, talked to the light-bodied devas, established America's first South Indian monastery, founded Hinduism's first international magazine, saw and then recreated the future. Little wonder he was chosen by Yoga Swami to carry on the Nandinatha Kailasa lineage. Little wonder he was recognized in the East as the West's first authentic Satguru. Everything he did was to meet a need, to elevate consciousness, to preserve Hindu Dharma for the future, not the nearest future, but the far future of thousands of years, what he loved to call the future of futures. His temple was built to last 1,000 years. His monastery and yoga order were crafted to last even longer. His magazine continues to inspire and transform not merely individuals and institutions, but entire nations. His realization of absolute reality supersedes it all, yet he could explain karma to a child. In this 10th year since his great departure, we dedicate this book to Guru Deva, an Eastern soul in a Western body, a man who loved all that is modern and used it to protect all that is ancient. We fall at his feet, humbled by the certainty that we have no more captured him and his predecessors here than one can snare the midday sun. Enjoy his story and that of his guru and his guru's guru and so on back in history, and hope in your heart that you will one day meet someone like him. Jai Satguru Shivaya Subramania Swami. Jai. Preface. At an auspicious moment during the Around the World 1972 Indian Odyssey, Satguru Shivaya Subramania Swami, Guru Deva, gave Diksha in Sri Lanka to several of his devotees. One, a teacher, received the mission to remain with his wife and preteen son in the village of Alavedi near Subramunia Ashram in order to collect oral and written histories about Yoga Swami's lineage of gurus. The timing was critical. Yoga Swami's great departure had happened in 1964, and the memories of those who were close to him were still fresh. They saw the need to chronicle their guru's life, so they put aside their usual distrust of outsiders and eagerly shared their experiences. It was important to capture their recollections at this time, for it assures a faithful telling of Yoga Swami's life and teachings. To wait for decades would invite a sketchy history and stories forgotten. It was discovered during this one-year sojourn that years earlier Yoga Swami had told devotees, "My biographer is coming. He's in a white body and he's coming here to tell my story." Once when an Englishman arrived in Jaffna, devotees ran to Swami saying, "This is your biographer." Yoga Swami retorted curtly, "No, he is coming later, much later." During the devotees' stay, more than a few of the villagers had dreams indicating that the American school teacher living in Alavedi was the biographer Yoga Swami had spoken of. Word swept through the Jaffna Peninsula. One by one, visitors came to the humble home of Swami's biographer to share their stories of their guru, Sri Lanka's line of Dharma, and of his guru, Chelapa Swami, and his guru's guru, Kadait Swami. The teacher sat on a mat listening to hundreds of narratives, carefully penning them by hand. Later, he wove them into a 120-page manuscript entitled Soldiers Within, which he presented to Guru Deva after returning to America. This book began with those papers. In fact, Soldiers Within was studied within the monastery for decades and shared with only a few close devotees. It remained unpublished until now. In the intervening years, Guru Deva asked his monks to undertake further research. We collected more oral histories and written biographical material, translating as needed from Tamil in consultation with Tamil elders. Finally, we assembled the material into this tome. In 1998, Guru Deva sat with his editing team of monks to review line by line a preliminary 400-page version, which did not include his own biography. Pass a sentence around a room of people and you may be amused by the differences between the first iteration and the last. Similarly, real-life stories told again and again are naturally altered and ultimately distorted, yet much of the history has been chronicled in this manner. It's not completely reliable, but often it is all we have. This biography of 7 mystics contains their actual writings, which is the bedrock of the book, alongside stories by their contemporaries, some of which are probably not perfectly accurate, but they are the stories told. This was a primary and persistent challenge confronting the editors of this book. For years we compared hundreds of sources, working hard to assure the nearest thing to historical fact. In particular, recording details are scarce for the book's earliest gurus, Maharishi Nandinatha, Rishi Tirumular, and the nameless Rishi from the Himalayas. Tirumular's history, for example, is known only in its broadest details, derived primarily from references in the ancient Periya Puranam and Tirumular's few cryptic autobiographical references in his Tirumantiram. To fill in the historical lacunae in those sections, we adopted a free-flowing style of embellishment to bring light and detail to lives that would otherwise be hidden in the oblivion of non-history. The stories of those early gurus, as told in this book, are a partially fictionalized recreation of events based on rudimentary historical facts, supplemented with a modern historian's understanding of life in that region in those days. The closer our story comes to now, the more founded in fact it becomes. For the chapters about Guru Deva's life, the situation was completely different. We had a surefit of sources. The challenge was to identify the 5% of his biographical material that we had room for. To allow him to tell his story in his own words as much as possible, we referenced his 1970 talk called Making of a Master, in which he detailed the mystical experiences of his youth. We also transcribed videos of 7 classes he gave aboard a ship during the 1999 Alaska Inner Search Travel Study Program, one on each decade of his life. Decades of his early life were found in the monastery archives. We examined certificates of birth and death, old passports, newspaper clippings, and other documents, childhood photo albums, letters he wrote from Sri Lanka in the late 1940s, and letters later written to him and his monks relating to events of his visit there from the observer's point of view. Guru Deva's own handwritten notes from those days proved indispensable. To structure the storyline of his life from the time he began teaching, we consulted an exhaustive monthly chronology kept by his monks over the years, along with the personal testimonies of those who lived and studied with him. Many events of the historic early inner searches were recovered from participants' diaries. Other facets of Guru Deva's life were drawn from our April, May, June 2002 memorial edition of Hinduism Today. But still, there were many gaps in the history, briefly worded bullet points in the chronology, and partially disclosed memories of Guru Deva's monks. That represented stories needed to be told. Thus, for 5 years, beginning in 2007, until the completion of this book, Guru Deva's editing team of monks set most other work aside, writing those stories and weaving them into this first full account of the life of this modern-day rishi. Guru Deva placed tremendous value on the use of artwork for its ability to convey teachings and tell stories. The extensive paintings in this book were created with that principle in mind, to bring these stories to life, to capture visually the places and events seen only by a few. They are the masterful work of Tiru S. Rajam, 1919 to 2009, of Milapur, Tamil Nadu. Though his first gift was music, his art was equally remarkable, created in a unique style rooted in the purely South Indian genre. He spoke of it as his worship, and he regarded himself as a kind of ascetic monk, which made his work with us, the ascetic monks, especially effectual, as these pages reveal. When others went to the temple, he adjourned to his canvas, always to paint something spiritual. In a somewhat dusky second-story studio, Rajam worked at his easel up to 14 hours a day from 2002 to 2003 to create 56 canvases for this book, each with multiple stories. His brush was guided by descriptions, photos, and illustrations that we, the Sannyasin editors living at Kauai's Hindu monastery in Hawaii, provided. The creative genius and cultural nuances are all his. The book you hold in your hands took some 38 years to complete, but it is a first edition, and first editions are seldom perfect. We welcome additional stories, photos, corrections, and ideas, which will make for further and more flawless future editions. Introduction. These are the stories of remarkable souls who knew the unknowable and held truth in the palm of their hand. They confounded their contemporaries, revealed life's purpose and path, and became inexplicably aware of the future. They worshipped God as Shiva, knowing him as all, and in all as the God, by other names, of every faith and path. Many are the gurus, but these knowers of God, those who have achieved the ultimate goal of yoga, transcending the mind itself, are called Satgurus. Their successors still live, their powers transmitted and maturing from one to the next, now flourishing in the 21st century. But their stories have remained largely untold, a kind of universal spiritual secret. Here, for the first time, what moved and motivated them is revealed, to the extent they let it be known. Here, for the first time, what they said and did is shared outside the circle of initiates. Scholars and scientists in our own time have probed the past for the story of man, and discovered how astonishingly little they could find. Our species has peopled the earth for over 2 million years, but we can account for barely a trace of that history today. How many unknown civilizations have come and gone? We live as if they never did, for they left so little. Piecing together the human events of a mere 50 centuries reveals dozens of cultures that flourished for ages and vanished almost entirely. Where are the ancient religions of Egypt, Sumeria, Greece, or Peru, Italy, Britain, or Persia? With precision, historians trace out their histories and their influence on modern times, but this is only scholarship. Buried cities, broken walls, enigmatic shards, excerpts of their laws, and scraps of their art are not the living traditions that made each of them great in its time. Apart from clusters of survivors here and there, the continuity of nearly all of Earth's ancient religions and cultures has been broken in recent millennia due to religious wars and, in the larger time frame of geology, by the obscuring power of recurring ice ages. The remarkable exception is ancient Bharata, modern-day India, the homeland of Hinduism, the world's oldest living faith. Knowledge of the religion's antiquity is traditional among Hindus and has been more or less proven by modern research. Though the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal path, belongs by its nature to the whole world, and has spread in many guises and tongues to distant continents throughout history, only in India did it survive and thrive in unbroken continuity throughout the millennia, flourishing today as a billion-strong global Hindu faith. India has always been the cradle of spirituality. During his 1895 lecture tour to India, Mark Twain wrote, "India is the cradle of the human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of tradition. Our most valuable and most instructive materials in the history of man are treasured up in India only." What spared Hinduism the oblivion that claimed every other ancient faith? It cannot have been mere good fortune. India is a difficult land in itself, and its history is marked by the repeated absorption of whole races and religions from beyond its borders. In addition, it has had more than its share of foreign invaders, natural disasters, and internal wars. Yet, drawing from some secret sustenance, Hinduism flourished with persistent vitality and retained its grip on the soul of India, never failing to inspire, never fading, ever renewed and strengthened from within. We can well ask who is responsible, who kept the religion alive in the mind of man through all these millennia, who keeps it vibrant and inwardly strong today. How many were they? Where do they live? How was it done? The answers lie in part in the pages of this book. Satguru Shivaya Subramania Swami, whose life story ends this biography, explained, "Among 1,000 devout Hindus, one or a few will abandon the world for a stricter path, living in seclusion by a river, in a cave, in the hills, or wandering the sky his roof. God his landlord. Each Hindu looks up to the Swami or Sadhu, knowing they will one day be where he is now. Among 100,000 tapasvins who search for God, 1 or 10 will find that which all souls are seeking. So high is the summit, so steep the ascent. Realized saints and sages are rare, but never absent in India. Their absence would leave it a land like any other. Their presence makes it holy. Every Hindu generation has produced its farmers, lawyers, mothers, kings, beggars, scholars, priests, swamis, and godmen. Yet all of these souls together do not carry or sustain the full force of the Sanatana Dharma, for they cannot. They are each engaged in their own desires, their own affairs, or their own quest. Their search continues. They do not yet possess the fullest knowledge. They have yet to accrue their soul's full maturity. Even after God realization, the soul continues to evolve. It does not vanish, nor does the world disappear. An enlightened man can help many forward on the spiritual path according to his maturity of soul. Whose mission is it to guide whole generations? Who turns from their search to guide hundreds of millions on their way? Only those whose search is utterly ended, only the perfected souls who have become the goal itself. Such men live, such men have always lived. They are known as siddhas, which means accomplished ones or perfected ones. They are a special class of yogis, each a fully matured soul, and heir to the inner force and subtle knowledge of the Sanatana Dharma, even as the masses of India are heir to its outer precepts and practice. They hold the power of it and protect its destiny. One with Shiva, they speak and behave only in expression of the will of God. All gurus differ one from another, their parampara or lineage, as well as on their individual nature, awakening, and attainments. Basically, the only thing that a guru can give you is yourself to yourself. That is all, and this is done in many ways. The guru would only be limited by his philosophy, which outlines the ultimate attainment, and by his own experience. He cannot take you where he himself has not been. It is the guru's job to inspire, to assist, to guide, and sometimes even impel the disciple to move a little farther toward the self of himself than he has been able to go by himself. The Satguru is needed because the mind is cunning and the ego is a self-perpetuating mechanism. It is unable and unwilling to transcend itself by itself. Therefore, one needs the guidance of another who has gone through the same process, who has faithfully followed the path to its natural end, and therefore can gently lead us to God within ourselves. Remember, the Satguru will keep you on the path, but you have to walk the path yourself. It is the disciple's duty to understand the sometimes subtle guidance offered by the Guru, to take the suggestions and make the best use of them in fulfilling the sadhanas given. Being with a Satguru is an intensification on the path of enlightenment, always challenging, for growing is a challenge to the instinctive mind. If a guru does not provide this intensification, we could consider him to be a more philosophical teacher. Not all gurus are Satgurus. Not all gurus have realized God themselves. The idea is to change the patterns of life, not to perpetuate them. That could be the only reason one would want to find a Satguru. Some teachers will teach ethics, others will teach philosophy, language, worship, worship and scriptures. Some will teach by example, by an inner guidance. Others will teach from books. Some will be silent while others will lecture and have classes. Some will be orthodox while others may not. The form of the teaching is not the most essential matter. What matters is that there be a true and fully realized Satguru, that there be a true and fully dedicated disciple. Under such conditions, spiritual progress will be swift and certain, though not necessarily easy. Of course, in our tradition, the Siddhas have always taught of Shiva and only Shiva. They have taught the Shiva Dharma, which seeks to serve and show Shiva in three ways: as personal Lord and Creator of all that exists, as existence, knowledge, and bliss, the love that flows through all form, and finally as the timeless, formless, causeless self of all. While the millions lead their lives along the length and breadth of India, the yogis and sages who unveil eternal truth within their souls sit for years in silence or gather in conclave. High above the world, in fulfillment of their duty and their mission as guardians of the truth in man, carrying the knowledge and force of Hinduism through an age of ignorance, the Himalayan seers have revealed and passed on the Sanatana Dharma to every generation, reawakened knowledge of it in the minds of the population during troubled times, rekindled the lamps of faith when devotion wearied, and carried to every corner of India year after year the knowledge that Shiva is within you, within all things, that Shiva is all things. When all is said and done in this world, naught else matters than to have lived in such a way as to come a little closer to the infinite within. In Asia this is well understood, hence the deep reverence the devout extend to the gurus who walk among us, guiding and showing the way of Dharma that leads to liberation. Guru Deva spoke further of the guru's role in the Hindu tradition. In a traditional Shaivite family, the mother and the father are the first teachers or gurus of their children, teaching by example, explanation, giving advice, and direction until their children are old enough to be sent to their next guru in the arts, sciences, medicine, and general education. Families that have a Satguru will often choose the most promising religious young son to go to his ashrama to study and learn the religion and become a sannyasin or a family pandit in later years, depending on how his life works out. In this case, the mother and father, the first gurus, turn the entire direction of their son over to the Satguru, the second guru, who then becomes mother and father in the eyes of the son and in the eyes of his parents as well. A Satguru doesn't need a lot of words to transmit the spirit to another person, but the Shishyas have to be open and be kept open. The little bit of spirit extends like a slender fiber, a thin thread, from the Satguru to the Shishya, and it is easily broken. A little bit more of that association adds another strand, and we have 2 threads, then 3, then 4. They are gradually woven together through service, and a substantial string develops between the guru and the Shishya. More strings are created, and they are finally woven together into a rope strong enough to pull a cart. We've seen in India the huge thick ropes that pull a temple chariot. That is the ultimate goal of the Guru-Shishya relationship. Upon the connection between Guru and Shishya, the spirit of the Parampara travels, the spirit of the Sampradaya travels. It causes the words that are said to sink deep. They don't just bounce off the intellect. The message goes deep into the individual. Between the Guru and Shishya, many threads are all woven together, and finally we have a firm rope that cannot be pulled apart or destroyed, even by 2 people pulling against one another. That is Sampradaya, that is Parampara, that is the magical power of the Nathas. As we look at this great line of Satgurus coming from Lord Shiva himself through Nandinatha and countless ones before Nandinatha, to Rishi Tirumular and countless rishis after him, to the Rishi of Bangalore, to Swami, Chalaspaguru, and Yogaswami, we see the same spiritual force flowing. We see an undaunted, rare succession of individuals who considered adversity as a boon from the gods, wherein all the accumulated accumulated karmas to be wiped away come together in one place to be taken care of all at once. In Sri Lanka and India, men commonly prostrate themselves full face on the ground when they come into the presence of a holy man, no matter when or where they meet him. In this way, they offer their devotion to the divinity or superconsciousness they sense in him. When they come to worship at his ashram, they bring fruit or flowers or some other offering to show their respect. This tradition of worship is known in Sanskrit as Guru Bhakti. There are entire scriptures exalting the Guru and his importance on the spiritual path, and chants to the Guru sung when one enters his presence. By expressing such devotion, people remind themselves powerfully that they are on this earth not for the pleasure of the senses, nor for the acquisition of wealth, not for the storing of knowledge, not for the development of a powerful ego, but for the realization of God within themselves, that ineffable and absolute truth which the mystics in this book held in the palm of their hand. Without a Satguru, all philosophy, knowledge, and mantras are fruitless. Him alone the gods praise who is the Satguru, keeping active what is handed down to him by tradition. Therefore one should seek with all effort to obtain a preceptor of the unbroken tradition, born of Supreme Shiva. Kularnava Tantra 10.1. Chapter 1. Seeking a Guru in Ceylon. Having saved his funds by living a frugal, almost ascetic existence, Robert Hansen, 20, boarded a steamer in February of 1947, sailing from San Francisco under the Golden Gate Bridge en route to Sri Lanka, then called Ceylon, heading the 5-member American-Asian Cultural Mission. Months before, he had danced on the stage of the San Francisco Ballet Company, reveling in the joys of being their premier dancer. But the lifelong spiritual urge within him would not be subdued by worldly success, and he was determined to leave for the exotic East. There he hoped to find a true and authentic guru who would guide him to the self within. In sharing that departure with the monks of his yoga order 25 years later, he described it as a dark, dreary day, and noted the Dutch merchant marine boat, the MS Mapia, sailed with an English crew. He was free of responsibilities for the first time in years, and it was a freedom he savored. The month-long voyage was aboard a working ship with rough accommodations. Robert's berth was the cheapest available, a tiny one-man chamber below deck, right above the engine room. This was to provide an unexpected encounter with the supernormal, which he shared aboard another ship during a 1999 Alaska travel study cruise with 45 disciples. I took the first ship after the war leaving the port for Sri Lanka. It was a freighter. My cabin was right over the engine room, and that was very disturbing. I remember one time I was in deep meditation, really deep meditation, not really hearing anything. Then I came out of that silence and heard this roaring engine. Rrrr. I said to myself, I wish this noise would just stop, and it did. Immediately, the whole ship stopped. We floated for 3 days, going off course a little bit. They couldn't find out what was wrong. Finally, they found that 2 screws had come loose in the engine. They fixed the problem, and the engine started up again. It was a lucky thing because we were going through minefields. It was just after the war. The ship could have been blown up very easily, and only toward the end of the voyage did we know what the cargo was. It was munitions. That would have been a big bang for all of us, something you would want to miss. In a later recounting, he reflected on how this experience impressed on him the power of the meditative mind, a power that was unleashed spontaneously that day on the ship. The cultural troupe practiced on the wooden deck of the moving ship and built a small pool in which they could splash around on hot days. They shared meals with the crew, even the captain. The captain took his gallant young passenger to the wheelroom one day and told Robert, "See that pen on the table? If I even pick it up, I relinquish my job as captain." Robert would recall this later in life when describing his duties as a guru. The troop disembarked in Bombay on March 8th, but as their Indian visas designated them as through passengers, they stayed just a few days before boarding a train for the south of India. From Madras, they took a ferry across the narrow Palk Strait to the Talaimanar on the western side of Ceylon. Boarding another train, they reached Colombo in mid-March of 1947. On March 23rd, Robert wrote from his new home on Galley Road, "Ceylon is much better than our hearsay before arrival. If you hear anything good about this country, double it, and you'll have the truth. It truly is the garden spot of the world. The people are alert, strong, wide awake, healthy, and desirous of modernizing their country in every way. Ceylon is nothing like India. The day after my arrival, some friends, a Sinhalese man and his wife and driver, took me up to Kandy. You should have been there. We went to the Temple of the Tooth and the old Kandy Palace, which is in ruins now. Everywhere you look all over the island, you see nothing but green trees all year around. People plowing with elephants and by hand. The men wear sarongs or pants. The ladies wear saris. In Kandy they dress in a different way. A man is walking by with a box balanced on his head. That's the way people carry things here. There are several boys that take care of the house. Every time you pass, they come out with a big 'Hello, sir.' It's about all the English they know. They are so polite, they always say yes to everything, whether they understand or not. We thought it would be very hot, but it's not at all, and rather cool at night. And though this is their hot season, I can still wear a wool sport coat and not sweat too badly. We have to keep everything under lock and key because we are not living in an age of saints, though Ceylon and India are both very spiritual countries. They respect people a lot who don't eat meat, take coffee or tea, or drink or smoke. So I have won many fine friends, and being universally minded can mix with any type of people, class, or faith, which is a big advantage. On Saturday, my friends and I, March 29th, were going up to Adams Peak, about 6,000 feet above the sea level. It's very cold there, to see the sunrise on Sunday morning. Every full moon, people of all beliefs go there and shout love to all, whether they are Buddhist, Hindu, Mohammedan, or Christian, rich or poor. You see many strange and wonderful things, such as snake charmers, fortune tellers that can tell from old Sanskrit records just how many in your family and describe them all to a T, and all your past and future. The records are thousands of years old and take a long time to read. Elephants walking down the street, bargaining, new tongues, beautiful sunsets, tea at 3:30 p.m. Driving on the other side of the street makes it hard for U.S. pedestrians. Love to all, right soon, Bob. Robert's journey to Lanka was choreographed by his early catalysts. In fact, his first teacher, Grace Burrows, received him when he reached Colombo, welcomed him to her dance studio there, and saw to his well-being for the first year of his stay. Meeting his mentor's challenges. In Ceylon, he studied with his fourth catalyst on the path, Dayananda Priyadasi Daryl Pyrus, a Sinhalese Buddhist who, during his first visit to the U.S. in 1934, had established an ashram at the Oakland home of Robert's second catalyst, Mother Christney. Dayananda was a dynamic teacher of meditation and occultism and a great patriot of this island nation. Ceylon was then in the final stages of 21 years of active struggle for independence from Great Britain, which it gained in 1948. The times were unsettled, and the 50-ish Dayananda, who was both meditative mystic and charismatic politician, took advantage of the situation to train his new protege personally in the art of getting positive things done in the world. Within months of his arrival, Robert helped found 2 schools for village children, assisted in reviving the dormant Kandyan dance, and introduced electric power saws to carpenters who had never seen such contraptions. These down-to-earth projects were a part of his training. I was happy and awed to meet my fourth catalyst on the island of Sri Lanka, a Buddhist. He was a strong, active Sinhalese man dedicated to spiritual awakening and bringing this through in a vitally helpful way to all of humanity. He had been high in Ceylonese government and was practical and forceful as a teacher. I studied with him for 1 year and a half. In earlier years, Dayananda attained enlightenment in a cave in Thailand by sitting in the morning, eyes fixed upon the sun, following its travel across the sky all day long until it set at night. He practiced under his guru this most difficult sadhana. Then one night, while meditating in a cave, the cave turned to a brilliant light, and a great being appeared to him, giving him his mission and instructions for his service to the world. My fourth catalyst taught me how to use the willpower, how to get things done in the material world. He was a real father to me. I needed this at 21 years of age. I wanted to meditate, but he wanted me to work to help the village people in reconstructing the rural areas. He assigned me to do different duties, sometimes several at a time, which I had to work out from within myself. One was seeing that a new village bridge was put up that had been washed out in a flood, bringing into another village modern saws and carpentry equipment to replace traditional tools used in building furniture. I had to take a survey of all the carpenters using hand saws on the west coast of Sri Lanka. I went around with a notebook and listed all their names and addresses and the types of saws they were using, for my assignment was to see that they all would eventually be provided with electric saws. Getting modern equipment into the Moratuwa area was one of the biggest assignments I had ever had, and I had no idea how to begin, for I had never done anything of this nature in my life. Occasionally my catalyst would ask, "Well, have they gotten their saws yet?" All I could say was, "Well, I'm working on it." Executing governmental changes was strange to me. My life had been quiet, with no exposure to methods of business. But even worse, I was in a foreign country that had different customs, subtle ways of relating and suggesting. Most of the educated could speak English beautifully. In the villages, however, only the native languages, Sinhalese and Tamil, were spoken and understood. The craftsmen were accustomed to the old ways, their fathers' ways of making furniture, and were not easily persuaded that electric saws would improve their work. Some had grown up in remote regions where there was no electricity, no running water, so naturally they resisted such a massive change. They made good, sturdy furniture already. Why complicate life further, they must have thought. My natural shyness was the biggest barrier, though. I had to interview people, do research, and convince people of the practicality of electric equipment. Finally, it unfolded to me from the inside how to go about it. I drew up an elaborate proposal, long and wordy, with myriad details, diagrams, names, and addresses. I gave it to him. He was pleased and said, "Now what I want you to do is take this fine proposal to the head of the Department of Rural Reconstruction. You give it to him, and I will do the rest. But while you are in his office, sit down with him and tell him how fast work is done in your country by using modern equipment to make furniture." I was happy. At last I had something definite to do that would bring this project to a successful end. I went into Colombo to the Office of Rural Reconstruction and presented the proposal. The government was convinced, and not many months later the modern electric saw became available and popular in the Moratuwa villages for any carpenter who needed one. Sri Lanka had just that year received its independent dominion status from the Crown, and there was a lot to do to bring the rural areas up to better standards. I did my part in the best way I knew how, and was glad to do it. One assignment like this after another was given to me. This fourth catalyst of mine worked on the philosophy that you do what you're told. If you are given an assignment, do it to perfection. Finish it, and don't come back with excuses. If he sent you on a mission, you wouldn't dare return until you had completed that mission, not to your satisfaction, but to his. He might have nothing more to do with you if you failed. I knew that, so I was very, very careful. Inside myself, as I struggled to do tasks that seemed impossible, I could hear him as I struggled. I could hear him saying, "Don't fail, don't fall short. You create the obstacles. You can overcome anything, do anything, be anything." He challenged me to work problems out from within myself, offering little advice and often assigning a task and then just leaving. He was quick to point out my mistakes, even though he knew I was sensitive and couldn't stand being scolded. Still, he scolded and criticized harshly. This was good for me, and I am still thankful for his direct and powerful ways. days. He made me use my own inner intelligence to complete each assignment, and most of them were of a worldly nature. At this time in my life, that is exactly what I needed to strengthen the outer shell, to learn to accomplish duties in the world. It was invaluable in later years. Dayananda had me meditate in the villages. I would sit in the lotus position for an hour or two while he talked to the village people about meditation, bhavana. They were all Buddhists. They appreciated the Buddhist philosophy but did not meditate. So together we would go from village to village encouraging the people to meditate, to put the enlightened teachings into practice. Finally, I was getting my own meditating done while he was teaching the people and the Buddhist priests about it. Prior to my arrival in Sri Lanka, Dayananda had worked with Thailand's Buddhist priests to build a wonderful school of meditation that served to profit the Thai people. Because of his efforts, many priests now meditate in Thailand, as do the lay people of the country. Every once in a while, I remarked, I want to go into a cave and meditate. I want to realize the self, he said. Plenty of time for that. You can go into a cave and meditate after you have finished the next 2 or 3 assignments. Anyway, the cave is inside of you. So I continued with the assignments month after month. From time to time I reminded him, you know, I came to Sri Lanka to find my guru. It had been impressed on me by my teacher in California that this would happen in Sri Lanka, but that I should have total realization of the self first. So I had come to Sri Lanka to meditate, to realize the self, and to find my guru. Yet here I was in governmental agencies and wandering around in the villages. I deeply felt that if I could get away from doing external things and go into a cave, which is traditionally the ideal place to meditate, I really could realize the self. In fact, I was sure of it. If he would just give me a little time off, but would he? No. I confess I rebelled. Inwardly I criticized this incessant concern about business and social change. After all, I thought, he is not my guru, and I am not here to change the world. I'm here to meditate. Maybe I should just go off to a cave without telling him. The rebellion externalized my awareness. Suddenly it was more difficult to do the assignments. I was too preoccupied, divided between what I wanted personally and what my teacher wanted me to do. I struggled for a while, but then conquered this rebellion within a week and never allowed it to occur again. The biggest enemy on the path is a rebellious nature, wanting to do things our own personal way, being inflexible and unable to give up our own will for a greater purpose. I settled down to obey him exactly and directly, becoming an even more positive person. I was a very positive person at that time and remain so today. I visited and lived in many Buddhist temples in Sri Lanka. I was received by the monks there. I saw how they lived, saw how they dressed, and that influenced in a very strict way the monastic protocols that we later put into action in our own monastic order. Dayananda was campaigning incessantly on the road, taking his protege from village to village. He aspired to be the head of the country, and many thought he would be, though it never happened. He once took Robert to a Buddhist home where they lived for 3 days. The teacher took the opportunity to stretch the young American's discipline and demanded that he meditate through the night without respite. Dayananda was a skillful speaker and would often hold forth from a makeshift stage or under a tree, his American executive secretary standing nearby. One day in a remote village they were standing together as the local chieftain was speaking words of introduction, working the crowd for Dayananda's speech. Almost playfully he turned to Robert and said, "Watch this." Dayananda closed his eyes, his concentration etched on his brow. Within a minute the speaker completely changed subjects, talking of things that Dayananda and Robert had shared earlier. Robert soon realized that Dayananda had gone within himself and entered the man's mind, and was in fact speaking through him. It was a demonstration of white magic that he never forgot. Impressive, he would later say, but not all that useful. Dayananda was full of such magic making, something Robert would later regard as an obstacle to spiritual unfoldment, not a demonstration of it. At one point, Dayananda gave his young charge a wind-up clock and instructed him to follow a Buddhist meditation practice. Robert was to set his clock to wake him in 2 hours. When the alarm went off, he was to sit in lotus posture and meditate for a time as deeply as he could. Then he would reset the clock, lie down on the floor and sleep, waking in 2 hours to meditate again. Throughout the night, day after day, he followed this discipline, meant to bring the consciousness of meditation into other states of mind. While working with Dayananda, Robert remained busy with the travels of the cultural troupe. They traveled north and south, performing at the nation's formal musical and dance halls, in small towns and on college stages. They raised funds for the Child Protection Society at Royal College Hall in Colombo, and mesmerized the crowd at Bishop's College on July 23, 1947, where the reviewer noted Robert Hansen again proved himself a clever ballet and character dancer. He worked his body hard and drank so much hot water to purify himself that the Sinhalese called him Unuwathura, which means hot water in that language. From the town hall in Kalutara, in Wales College Hall in Moratuwa, in the Young Men's Buddhist Association, they brought their dynamic fusion of East and West song and dance to audiences who had never seen such performances, let alone the matchless muchachos and the acrobatic tango during Latin American night at the Silver Fawn Club. Dance took great effort with all that travel, yet Robert managed to squeeze in another of his loves, organizing. Again and again the newspapers reported on his efforts to bring the people of Ceylon together for good causes. He formed the World Fellowship of Youth on March 20th, 1948, and soon established the World Fellowship of Artistes, which grew into the Opera and Ballet Guild of Ceylon, established on July 23rd. Robert was about to embark on his greatest challenge, the struggle to realize Parashiva, the self within all. Every experience in life had led him to this moment, a moment that would transform the young American into an enlightened being who would one day transform and guide Hinduism in the United States and beyond. To understand the experience he would soon have in the deep southern jungles of Ceylon and the spiritual tradition he had discovered, it is necessary to go back in time to the Himalayan mountains and the mystical sages who first charted the path Robert now found himself on. Chapter 2. Maharishi Nandinatha. The Himalayan Hindus of 2,000 years ago lived a rustic life, close to the land, close to their spiritual roots, close to one another, on whom they depended for sustenance. Hamlets and ashrams were always built near a river, fresh water being central to survival. Their thatched cottages took many shapes, mostly round and rectangular, engineered with 4 or 6 posts inside, over which a sheet of woven branches, grasses, and leaves was layered. This thick sheet of thatch, rightly constructed, could keep the region's brutal weather out. For further protection from the elements, the simple dwellings were sheltered strategically amid and beneath large trees. The huts were organic, providing warmth in the winter while being cool during the high-altitude, sun-intense summers. The floors made of cooling earth mixed with cow dung and straw were antiseptic and served the important task of repelling insects. Each day the dung floor was sprinkled with fresh water and buffed to renew the surface. Mountainous lands are severely sloped, so the Himalayan agriculturists terraced the hills, a difficult but necessary task. They grew rice, cereals, and garbanzo beans, lentils, and root crops. Roots were kept as famine food, saved for the hardest of times. Fruits were abundant, and every home was planted with apricots and apples. Families kept bees for the honey and wax, cows for milk, goats for meat. Not everyone was vegetarian, though most were, and to serve as beasts of burden. Being so adept at rock climbing, they learned to cultivate grasslands for cattle grazing. They crushed their oil from mustard seeds for eating, cooking, and lighting the lamps. Mustard was so crucial to life that the oil was poured on either side of the home's threshold when important visitors arrived. The mountains were crisscrossed with trails along which life-sustaining commodities traveled. to be traded at distant marketplaces. So narrow were the passageways that a single man or goat was all that could pass. These paths were called ajapatha, meaning goat path in Sanskrit. Each goat could only carry a few kilograms, so goods were chosen thoughtfully. The two primary routes of the day passed through Joshimath, a Shaiva center, Badranath, a Vaishnava center, and Kendarnath, a Shaiva stronghold. This pastoral life offered many opportunities for gatherings, especially in the ashrams, and the Himalayan Hindu holy men loved nothing more than to hold philosophical discourse and debates, often under the wide canopy of a ficus tree. Everyone would sit on the ground for these meetings. There were no books. Learning in those days was conveyed orally and committed to memory by the students. The spiritual elders had small mat seats or wooden tables called pitha, some 6 inches high, on which they would sit to guide the others and impart instructions to students of different ages. These rishis were often married men, not sannyasins. Some sannyasins also had disciples living with them, while others engaged in their spiritual meditation and other practices in strict seclusion. Students were of every age, having found their way to the remote teaching living centers to be schooled in the ancient arts and sciences, to learn Sanskrit, and to master a variety of skills for practical living. Every household served as a training center of farming skills and apprenticeship in other arts. Life in the Himalayan uplands was arduous, challenging, and particularly conducive to religious and spiritual pursuits. It was regarded as a sacred region where holy persons conversed with divinities and lay persons traveled to ascend to paradise. The Joshimath-Badranath route, famous for its pilgrimage sites, has been celebrated as the path of ascent to heaven, Svarga Arahana, since the age of the epic Mahabharata, a lineage of masters. In this Himalayan remote there lived a great yogi known as Maharishi Nandinatha, a rare and illumined soul whose inner eye was opened to the perfection of the universe, a knower of Shiva, of the self-god within. He himself derived from a long line of Satgurus, whose names and biographies are lost, and thus he is regarded as the first known preceptor of the lineage known today as the Nandinatha Sampradaya, the agamic tradition that Robert Hansen had discovered in Ceylon. Nandinatha had for his direct disciples the 4 sages, Shanaka, Sanatana, and Sanatkumara, all bearing the title of Nandi. Besides them were Shiva Yoga Muni, Patanjali, Vyagrapada, and Tirumular, also known as Sundaranatha. All 8 were the spiritual leaders of one of the initial agamic schools and were known as Nathas. Of them, the first 4 received Lord Shiva's special grace and were commanded by him to disperse themselves in the 4 directions, carrying the message of the agamas. Once at their appointed destinations, they practiced intense yoga in the agamic way, through sun and rain, hail and storm, and in time ascended to celestial status. The yogis around Maharishi Nandinatha were well versed in the Shiva Sutras, whose aphorisms were regarded as the voice of Shiva himself, a puzzling, mathematically sophisticated set of 14 couplets that seemed to be about the Sanskrit alphabet, but on deeper reflection are a key to understanding the composition of the cosmos, showing how this language creates a mystical connection to the divine from its very roots. The early tantric traditions, from Kashmir Shaivism to Shaiva Siddhanta, share a love of the Shiva Sutras, those obscure, arcane, mysterious verses that yogis study even in the 21st century to delve into the mystical apprehension of the universes, gross and subtle. These 14 sutras, revealed to Panini, who wrote them down as a kind of yogic science notebook for its time, emanated from the drum held in the raised right hand of Lord Shiva Nataraja. This science of sound and words remained a secret to most, for only the illumined could comprehend it, being unspoken knowledge directly from the Supreme Lord and beyond the reach of the ordinary mind. Sages like Shanaka Sanatana, Sanatkumara, Patanjali, and others were able to hear the transcendental sounds of Shiva's drum, but were unable to grasp the inner core meaning of the aphorisms. Legend says they approached Maharishi Nandinatha seeking an explanation. Moved by the sincerity of their search for this rare knowledge, the Satguru proceeded to elucidate the essence of the sutras. He offered 27 verses, which are the only written teachings of this primal preceptor that have survived the tides of time, and thus form the oldest scriptural text from this Shaiva Siddhanta lineage. Terse and wise, it is known as the Nandikeshvara Kashika. Kashika means the illuminator. It is said that Sri Nandikeshvara, as Maharishi Nandinatha is also known, accomplished the feat of explaining the inexplicable due to two things: his profound God realizations, which gave him a oneness with Shiva within, and the completion of a difficult, some would say impossible austerity, that of reciting the epic chant Sri Rudram 10 million times. Nandinatha's Kashika is more a meditation than an explanation, a contemplation on 36 constituents of the universe, from the most subtle to the very earth on which we stand. Lord Shiva's unfoldment of the cosmos through sound, specific sounds that are embedded forever in the letters of the Sanskrit language. These constituents, or tattvas, are at the heart of the cosmology of Shaiva Siddhanta, for in them can be found every level of consciousness, every element, every sense and color, every energy, vibration, and sound that exists. Shaiva Siddhanta speaks of 36 tattvas in all. Knowing the tattvas, one knows all. The ancient texts are dense, convoluted, and opaque, for in those days the secrets of yoga and inner consciousness were thought too precious to be openly expressed, so they were concealed in a special kind of language, like a cryptogram, assuring that only those who were qualified would have access. Others would be confounded. Indeed, reading these texts today is confounding, as this glimpse into the far past, into the heart of the progenitors of yoga, the Himalayan masters, proves. On the following pages is a selection of sutras from Maharishi Nandinatha's 2200-year-old philosophical text. Without the insights and commentary of knowers of God and Sanskrit pandits of the highest order, even these aphorisms, composed to elucidate the even more arcane 14 Shiva Sutras, may defy understanding. Here is Nandinatha's verse 10, followed by a commentary by Shabarathnam Shivacharyar. The Supreme Lord of all, denoted by the letter Ri, being in union with Shiva Shakti, denoted by the letter Lri, whose form is of the nature of pure consciousness, enters Maya, activates it slightly, creates the world of movables and immovables, and makes them expand. He does all this solely and absolutely, being one. Commentary. When it is said that the Supreme Lord is absolutely one only, and that being in union with Shakti, and by entering into Maya he creates the world, it is observed that the concept of the non-dual Lord gets affected. A defect occurs in the concept of Advaita, as it is seen that, apart from the one Lord, there is the role of Shiva Shakti and Maya. In this verse and in the succeeding 3 verses it is explained that there is no such defect in the concept of non-dual Lord. Ri denotes the Supreme Lord, and Lri denotes Shakti and Maya. As stated in the Sri Tantra, the mind form of Shiva is Shakti, denoted by the letter Lri. The last letter, Ka, the root word, brings out from the unmanifest. Shakti constitutes the form of the Lord, and Maya is a part of his form. A person is not in need of external help in making his bodily movements. So also the Supreme Lord does not need an external help to make his form move and act. This is expressed by the term Kevala. Apart from Shiva, there does not prevail a separate existence for Shakti and Maya. 2 streams of teaching. Natha means Lord or Master, a knower of the self who has mastered the intricacies of his inner bodies and states of mind. Through the millennia, Nathas have been conveyors of esoteric knowledge and wielders of siddhis, powers, and soul. Natha Siddhas delve deep in the mind, invoking Shiva's grace, controlling the Kundalini Shakti. They worship with full heart and mind the Lord of Lords, Shiva, and in yogic contemplation experience identity in his being. The divine messages ideas of the eternal truths and how to succeed on the path to enlightenment are locked within the Natha tradition. All that we know as Shaivism today, agamic temple worship, homa, sannyasa, sadhana, tapas, yoga, tantra, and the theology of monistic theism, has been carried forward by the Himalayan orders of the Natha Sampradaya. Sampradaya means a living stream of tradition or theology. The Nathas are considered the source of Hatha as well as Raja Yoga. The oldest of Shaivite Sampradayas existing today consist of two major streams, the Nandinatha Sampradaya and the Adinatha Sampradaya. The Adinatha Sampradaya's earliest known exemplars were Maharishi Adinatha, Matsyendranatha, and Gorakshanatha, circa 950, expounder and foremost guru of Siddha Siddhanta Shaivism and founder of the well-known order of Kanfata Yogis. In the 21st century, the Adinatha and Nandinatha Sampradayas are both vibrant and vital. They share a common ground of theology, principles, sadhanas, and many scriptures, including the Vedas, Agamas, and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Though historical, societal, and geographical forces over the past 1,000 years have shaped differences between them, much of what is written by scholars about the Nathas refers to the northern Gorakshanatha school and lifestyle rather than the Tirumalar school. The two streams diverge in important ways. The foremost exposition of the Nandinatha Sampradaya is Tirumalar's Tirumantiram, circa 200 BCE, while that of the Adinatha Sampradaya is Gorakshanatha's Siddhasiddhanta Padati, circa 950 CE. Most texts of the Nandinatha Sampradaya are in the Tamil language, while most of the Adinatha are in Sanskrit. The Nandinatha Sampradaya is most influential in Sri Lanka and the south of India, while the Adinatha Sampradaya is most prominent in the north of India. The philosophy of the Nandinatha Sampradaya is known as Shaiva Siddhanta, while that of the Adinatha Sampradaya is known as Siddha Siddhanta. The primary philosophical difference concerns the means of liberation from rebirth. Adinathas hold that liberation is entirely dependent on our own thoughts and actions, while Nandinathas believe it cannot be attained without Shiva's grace. The Nandinatha Sampradaya values highly the necessity of a living preceptor who keeps the channels open to Lord Murugan, the first renunciate and traditional progenitor of the lineage. Tirumalar wrote, "Illuminating it is to perceive the Guru's sacred person. Illuminating it is to chant the Guru's sacred name. Illuminating it is to listen to the Guru's sacred word. Illuminating it is to reflect on the Guru's person." The Nandinatha Sampradaya is a Siddha Yoga tradition. Siddha means attainment, and its gurus have often demonstrated great mystical abilities and wisdom. It is said that these teachers have realized their oneness with the supreme god Shiva and have merged as completely as humanly possible with his divine source of all. With such realization comes limitless bliss and direct command of every power in the universe. There are many accounts of miraculous powers demonstrated by the masters of this lineage. The aid, even the glance of such a highly realized Siddha, can quicken spiritual practice. It is believed that without the Diksha, initiation of such teachers, the human instincts will always fail to lead to this highest realization. The Natha Sampradaya is an initiatory guru-shishya tradition. Membership in the Sampradaya is always conferred by initiation from a Diksha guru, either the lineage holder or another member of the Sampradaya whose ability to initiate has been recognized by his Diksha guru. The Natha initiation is conducted as a formal ceremony in which some portion of the awareness and spiritual energy, Shakti, of the Guru is transmitted to the Shishya student. The neophyte, now a Natha, is given a new name with which to support his new identity. This transmission or touch of the Guru is symbolically fixed by the application of holy ash to several parts of the body. In the Fantasticos, Sri Gurudev Mahendranath, a preceptor of the Adinatha Nandinatha Sampradaya wrote, "The passage of wisdom and knowledge through the generations required the mystic magic phenomenon of initiation, which is valid to this day in the initiation transmission from naked guru to naked novice by touch, mark, and mantra. In this simple rite, the initiator passes something of himself to the one initiated. This initiation is the start of the transformation of the new Natha. It must not be overlooked that this initiation has been passed on in one unbroken line for thousands of years. Once you receive the Natha initiation, it is yours throughout life. No one can take it from you, and you yourself can never renounce it. This is the most permanent thing in an impermanent life." Indian alchemy, known as Rashayana, involving the ritual, spiritual, and medicinal uses of mercury, cinnabar, and other minerals, crystal preparations, and elixirs, is practiced by the Natha Siddhas. The primary aim of the Natha Siddhas is to achieve liberation, or moksha, during their current lifespan. According to Guru Dev Mahendranath, another aim is to avoid reincarnation. Our aims in life are to enjoy peace, freedom, and happiness in this life, but also to avoid rebirth onto this earth plane. All this depends not on divine benevolence, but on the way we ourselves think and act. This last statement would not find agreement among proponents of the Nandinatha Sampradaya, however. In Shaiva Siddhanta, as expressed by Tirumalar himself, it is precisely Shiva's grace, and only that, which bestows the ultimate gift of liberation. Himself will create, himself will protect, himself will annihilate, himself will obscure. Himself having done these, he will bestow liberation. Himself will pervade and be the chief too. 1809. A selection of sutras from Maharishi Nandinatha's philosophical text. Compassionately willing to elevate the siddhas such as Shanaka and others, and to install them in the highest plane of consciousness related to the transcendental sound, Lord Nataraja, the absolute and unparalleled Lord of cosmic dance, sounded the drum, held in his raised right hand 14 times at the ending phase of the dance. The transcendental sounds emanating from the drum assumed the form of 14 aphorisms, and came to be known as the collection of Shiva Sutras. Now I proceed to explain the core meaning of those 14 sutras. The Supreme Lord, who is essentially free from the association of three qualities, having entered the cosmic flux known as Maya, through his conscious energy becomes all-pervasive, assumes the form of the worlds, and governs them. The letter A is the first and foremost of all the 51 letters. It is self-luminous in nature because of its total identity with the Supreme Lord. It shines forth as the Supreme Ishvara himself. Upon the union of the first letter, A, and the final letter, Ha, the word Aham gets formed. The letter A is of the nature of cogitability alone, being the unmanifest. The letter I denotes Chitkala. Because of its pervasive nature, the letter U denotes Vishnu. That which is the state of cogitability alone, having associated with Chitkala, assuming a form for the sake of cosmic function, creates the worlds and enters into them by means of pervasive nature, Vishnu, and becomes cogitable as the great Lord, Maheshvara. The Supreme Lord of all, denoted by the letter Ri, being in union with Shiva Shakti, denoted by the letter Ri, whose form is of the nature of pure consciousness, enters Maya, activates it slightly, creates the world of movables and immovables, and makes them expand. He does all this solely and absolutely, being one. Not even a slight difference can be seen between the moon and the moonlight, and between a word and its meaning. So also not even the slightest difference can be seen between the modifications and the one which sustains those modifications. Through his own energy, known as Chit Shakti, and through his own will, the Supreme Lord makes the entire range of worlds to unfold, from the causal source, known as Maya. The knowers of the scriptures realize that the letter Ri, which denotes the Supreme Lord, and the letter Ri, which denotes Shakti, are the specific letters belonging to the category of neuter. The letters I, O, and Na indicate the unified state of Maya and Ishvara. This kind of unification is seen in all the existence. Since he is the witness consciousness for all the manifested things, it is ascertained that the Supreme Lord is solely one only, having nothing apart from his own existence. What is known as space evolves from Ha, air evolves from Ya, fire evolves from Ra, water evolves from Va. Thus declares the exalted king of Shiva Yoga through his agamas. The 5 subtle elements from which the gross elements arise, namely sound, touch, form, taste, and smell, evolve from the 5 letters Na, Ma, Na, and Na. Sound, touch, form, taste, and smell are respectively the qualities of space, air, fire, water, and earth. The presence of these 5 elements is to be realized in all the existence. It has been declared that for all embodied beings, the 5 organs of knowledge, namely ear, skin, eye, nose, and tongue, evolve from the 5 letters Ja, Ba, Ga, Da, and Da, respectively. The great Ishvara, the absolute Lord of the universe, having well associated himself with the 3 qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas, which evolved prior to the creation of the worlds, constantly plays, presenting himself in each embodied being. The 3 qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas, evolve from the 3 letters Sha, Sa, Sha, and Sa. Lord Shiva is beyond all these tattvas whose evolution has been told so far. He is the sole witness of all beings and their actions. He assumes a form fit enough to bestow his abounding grace on all beings. I am the self of all, and I am one with the supreme letter Ha. Having imparted this final message, Lord Nataraja concealed himself from the vision of the sages. Thus ends the Nandakeshvara Kashika. Chapter 3. Tirumular is sent on mission. Having achieved the 8 cities in perfect enlightenment at the feet of the Natha Guru Maharishi Nandinatha in the Himalayas, Rishi Sundaranatha, later to become known as Rishi Tirumular, joined the venerable Natha lineage, and later became one of its most celebrated yogis. Of the centrality of his guru, he wrote in Tirumantaram, "By Nandi's grace, master I became, by Nandi's grace I sought Mular. What can happen without Nandi's grace? I remind, seeking to expound Nandi's path. By the grace of Nandi I sought Mular. By the grace of Nandi I became Sadashiva. By the grace of Nandi I became united with supreme wisdom. What I am is by the grace of Nandi." A view of oneness. Following his initiation, Sundaranatha was sent by his Satguru to revive Shaiva Siddhanta in the south of Bharat. Taking leave of Nandinatha and his brother monks, Sundaranatha began his life's mission to bring the true knowledge of the Agamas and Vedas to the southern parts of India in the Tamil language. It was a long and arduous journey in those days, thousands of kilometers by foot on simple roads and paths. Scripture notes that Rishi Sundaranatha took pains to visit the sacred Shaiva centers en route, beginning with Kedarnath in the north, a remote stone shrine in the snowy Himalayan peaks at the fountainhead of the river Ganga, near the border of Tibet. Now, apart from his Satguru, he sat at the headwaters of the river Ganga. His life's work lay ahead, his years of learning were complete, and his mystical experiences were swirling all about. He would later write of these early realizations, of the 4 forms of Shaivism, the 4 stages, the 4 relationships the soul has with God, the 4 realizations attainable, the 4 aspects of the descent of grace and the power of true renunciation of the world. Purposeful is my learning, body and soul together. I experienced the Lord in close intimacy. Nothing to stop him, he entered my soul. So immaculate and sublime was my learning. The 4, Charya and the rest, the 4 resultant realizations, the 6th, like the elaborate Vedanta and Siddhanta, are established by Nandi leaving his golden abode, for the sake of ignorant people to worship. Ask 6 historians when Tirumular lived, and you may well get 6 answers. This biography, based on statements in Tirumular's Tirumantaram, makes him a contemporary of Yogi Patanjali, author of the Yoga Sutras, who lived around 200 BCE. In another analysis, Sundaramurti Nayanar mentions Tirumular in his list of Nayanars. The common view that Sundaramurti Nayanar lived in the period between 840 to 864 Common Era would mean that Tirumular lived before that period. Then there is a reference by Tirumular himself in the Tirumantaram to the Golden Hall of Chidambaram, since the roof was first thatched in gold for the first time by the Pallava king Simhavarman, who lived in the 5th century Common Era. Many historians conclude that Tirumular must have lived in the later 5th or early 6th century Common Era, but this ignores the possibility that Tirumular was in Tirumantaram, describing Chidambaram from his mystic vision rather than from the sight of his physical eyes. Still others place him in the 10th century CE, noting that a sage by the name of Kalangi, the not uncommon name of one of Tirumular's disciples, was the guru of Bogar Rishi, who lived during that period and was connected to Rajaraja Chola. Others point to his linguistic style and suggest he lived as late as the 11th or 12th century. India's history is notoriously debatable, and the period in which these great gurus lived may forever defy certainty. His travels south, simply chronicled in the Periya Puranam by Secular in the 12th century, are envisioned in the tale below. The lone Sundaranatha traveled next to Pushapatishvara temple in Kathmandu, Nepal. Gautama the Buddha had preceded him 300 or 400 years before, traveling from Nepal to South India and then to Sri Lanka, bringing with him his philosophy. At the Shiva temple, Sundaranatha reflected on the Buddha's life and teaching and his own destiny. In pondering the life of Gautama, he gained courage and prepared to continue his pilgrimage, but there was a difference. Tirumular was immersed, as Buddhism is not, in the overwhelming, ever-consuming, passionate love for Shiva. He saw firsthand that divine love incinerates impurities and purifies the soul.